What were those early days like when the phone is ringing and someone says, "Hey, I was at Kids Park. I want a kids park to be in my neighborhood." Do you remember kind of those early moments of like being like,
Thrilling.
well, this is what we should do? Like, how was that experience like? Because that's organic growth, which so many entrepreneurs struggle for. But it seemed like it was kind of people were banging down your door saying, "How do we duplicate this amazing model?"
Yeah. It was really interesting. It was very complimentary. Going back to I'm a list maker, we had a lot of stuff documented. So that part was really good. So it was easier to get into the franchise model from that respect. I think the hardest part when doing that kind of thing, though, is you give out a lot of information before you can sell a franchise. And sometimes you end up giving out information and then they walk away and do it on their own, which is fine. And, that's business. Um,
Imitation is the biggest form of flattery, right?
I know. And I keep telling myself that. But, they make sometimes there are some changes made. And I always question, is that really for the betterment of the owner or is it for the betterment of the child and the family? And I really would like us to think more about the betterment of the family and the child than just the company, especially in childcare, because you are playing a big role.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle podcast. Today, we're going to be having an incredibly important conversation. Now, I have an amazing leader. I have a founder here with me today. I've got Debbie Milner, and we're going to be talking about her inspiration, what she started, Kids Park. So, Debbie, before we kind of dive into today's episode, if there was one way and you described yourself that had nothing to do with work, how would the individual sitting across this digital table with me be described?
Caring. I think people would say she's caring. She does what she says she's going to do.
That is an amazing way to be described. I hope people describe me in that same way, right? He's caring and that he does what he says he's going to do. I'm really excited to be able to dive into today's episode. We're going to talk about the origin story of recognizing the problem that Kids Park is filling. We're going to talk about addressing the changing dynamics of family interactions and just how people are supported in today's community. We're going to talk about work-life balance. We're going to talk about the rising cost of childcare. We're also going to talk about early childhood development and so much more. So as we kind of get started here, I want to have you take a couple seconds and describe your origin story. Why is Kids Park something that you thought was so necessary in your life? And then what has it turned into here?
When I was a young mom, I was living in California without any family support, no relatives. My husband was working where he traveled almost three weeks out of the month. And I was just at my wit's end trying to be a mom, work a full-time job, take care of a home, everything everyone else has to juggle. At the time, I was working, or I had worked, in a field called materials management, where the focus was get the material there on demand, just when you need it. I kept thinking, wow, if only I could have childcare on demand when I needed it. And that's where the concept began, because I felt that if I could have something I could rely on without having to make a phone call, I would be better at everything I was doing. Especially, I'd be better as a mom because I'd be less stressed.
Let's talk about some of those early days, because I love being able to dive into the feelings of those moments. So you're an early mom. You've got your own little ones. You're thinking about, how do I show up as the best version for them, right? When you're balancing life, raising your children, the stresses of everything else that comes along with that. What were some of those early experiences that you had? Were you frustrated that maybe you just couldn't get the time away? Do you feel like you couldn't give your kids the attention? Or do you feel like maybe you were preoccupied, if that makes sense, doing everything else when you were trying to also be as present as possible as a mom?
Absolutely. I'm a list person. I am always thinking, okay, these are the things I need to get done. This is what the order I'm going to do them in. And I would be, for instance, I'd be trying to play a fun version of Candyland with my daughter. But instead of, like you say, being present, I'm thinking about, I need to be doing this, this, and that. Whereas if it was already done, I'd be totally relaxed. Um, and then the frustration, of course, is when you are trying to coordinate more than two people. So um, if you can imagine, you're trying to make a hair appointment or a dentist appointment. So first you find out when they're available, then you call, someone to try to help you at home because you certainly aren't going to take a 2-year-old to one of those appointments. And then by the time you figure out your arrangements for the sitter, you call the person back and that slot's taken. And so you're starting all over again. So those are the frustrations.
What about the early days of trying to find a solution for this? Because I know that often the jump doesn't go from I have a problem to I'm going to create something. What were those early days like of trying and tribulation and like testing different things out, but realizing I'm going to have to create something completely new for myself?
Absolutely. I did try home daycares, and they're great, but they're very scheduled, and I didn't have a set schedule. So I wanted something where I could drop off perhaps at noon versus at 6 in the morning. Or if I went on vacation or if my daughter was sick, not have to pay for services I didn't use. Although I understand their model and they certainly deserve it, but from my point of view, uh, it was a weight on the budget. Let's put it that way. And then on the other side, I tried trying to get someone into my home. But again, it was a scheduling issue. Yes, I want you this week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but not next week. Then I only need Tuesday. So those all became very difficult. And I didn't really want to use a teenager. For one thing, they're not available during the day. And I also felt that sometimes if I got a teenager, I also had to check to see if the parent was home, because if there was an emergency, who had a car, who was going to be able to drive them. So I did try a lot of different things, and it just didn't seem to work.
The bigger problem that I think a lot of people can empathize with, I was taken while you were talking there to a story from a couple weeks ago. I was going hiking with a couple of my really good friends. I was roommates with these guys, Dante and his wife, Michaela, for about 6 years. So we lived together for a long time. Now, when they started building their own family, the one thing that they did is they moved to Austin, Texas. But all of his family is in Southern California, and her family is in Oregon, Northern California area. And the one thing that they said was the biggest mistake that we made was moving away from family because we didn't have any support, and it was so frustrating. Now, why do you feel like so many people have that similar frustration? In our previous conversation, we talked about isolation and loneliness. So many people move away from their extended family, their grandparents, their mom, their dad, and they just don't have that support. And it sounds like you came from that similar experience as well.
Absolutely. I had been in the Midwest and came to California with no family. But I would go take it even one step further, because even if you have family in the area, the availability of family is different than it used to be. I grew up, for instance, I lived 3 doors down from my grandparents, and they were always home. There was never a problem. But here, even what I've seen is that even if there is family in town, parents are working much longer, much later than they used to, so they're not available during the days. People travel. People have many outside commitments. So there's not that parent necessarily or friend or relative waiting for you at home who can adjust their schedules. So there is a sense of loneliness. I agree, of isolationism. You feel like you really are dependent upon yourself. And because of that, there has to be some services around that are totally flexible, because you're never going to get everyone on a a 9 to 5 schedule Monday through Friday. It doesn't exist anymore. Everything has to change.
And we talked about that in our previous conversation. Me being located in Las Vegas, Nevada, a huge portion of our community works the grave night shift or the graveyard shift from 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. or 7 p.m. in healthcare to 7 a.m. And you don't have options for childcare at that point in time. So let's talk a little bit about Kids Park and what makes Kids Park so special compared to all the other options that are out there.
Oh, many things. We definitely do childcare differently. One thing is the hours. Uh, Before COVID, we were open 7 days a week till midnight on weekends and 10 p.m. during the week because we wanted to, as you said, we wanted to be able to provide childcare for hospitality workers, restaurant workers, retail workers, people who went to school in the evening. So many things where it's traditional care is really focused on I'm opening at 6 and I'm closing at 6. What do you do if you don't fit that schedule? So that was the first thing we changed. The other thing is you pick your schedule. We have no contract with the parents to come on any day, any hour. You choose at only pay for the time you use, period. And then lastly, our whole setup looks different. In a traditional childcare center, you have a classroom of twos, a classroom of threes, and that's who you interact with during the day. Our setup is a one-room open classroom. We accept children from the ages of 2 to 10, or in some centers go up to 12. And they're all in the same room, but they are able to choose the activity they are most interested in. And just by doing that, a lot of times they stratify by age automatically. But the nice thing about it is if you're a 3-year-old and your best friend has just turned 4, you can still play with them. They're not moved off to another room. And the other thing is if you're coming with siblings, if you're 4 and your sibling is 6, you can be together. And then I also really valued the concept of older children being able to mentor the little ones. It's not going to put them in any kind of bullying, which you hear about all the time. We're finding that the older kids really are wonderful role models. They help the kids set goals. Now they know I want to be like that when I get older. And they learn from them. They learn so many things. It's like an older brother or older sister. They really help the little ones develop.
That was one of my earliest experiences in childcare. Was me and my sister would go together sometimes, and they would always separate us into separate areas. And I remember my sister would be so upset, and I would often be upset that I couldn't spend time with my little sister. And I didn't really recognize the dynamics of just trying to compartmentalize different age groups to stop things like bullying or everything else like that. But I feel like one of the best opportunities we have is to look up and admire older kids, because we like to start thinking about how we can be more like them, the things that they do. And especially when they're nice, like so many kids are, they start to inspire us at a young age. And so I love the model that you guys have kind of implemented.
One of the things I was going to add is how we use the term bullying. One of our teachers, I think, really states it so well. When there is perhaps an issue between kids, she'll say, is this person being mean to you or are they bullying you? There's a difference. And most kids don't do it intentionally. Sometimes, they're learning to master the language as well. So they may be making some mistakes, but most kids we have very little interaction based on kids not behaving correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's not in a child's natural nature to bully, right? I mean, I feel like we do a terrible job at labeling children as bullies, and we kind of put them in that negative light, which comes from a place of judgment. And I know when I was growing up, it was never my intention nor my friend's intention to ever pick on and be intentionally malicious to somebody else, right? Especially at such a young age.
Exactly. It just may be their communication skills need to be better honed.
I want to talk a little bit about the early days of, creating Kids Park. So we find out that we're going to create a business. What were those early days like? Because were there other models that you looked at and you picked and chose from that said, this is what we like, what these guys do well. We don't want to be like that example. What was that like?
Stressful. It was a lot of research. So I spent almost a year doing research. And part of that time, I went to a lot of different women's groups, family groups, preschools, to see if I could interview people. I even went to a toy store and stood there and talked to people to find out, what do they want? Am I the only one who has this problem, or would other people use the service that I was describing? And it wasn't until I think I must have gathered about 100 to 200 surveys that I finally said, yeah, I think I can make a go of this, and went for it. And then in terms of trying to envision it, it has grown, or it has morphed over the years. It's always been play-based, focused, play-focused. It's always been one room. It's always been a mixture of kids, but we brought in different types of play, which I think has made it a lot more fun. And my best tester was my daughter Rita. I would say, do you like it? You don't like it? What do you want? What do your friends want? So I interviewed parents, but I spent a lot of time interviewing kids, and you'd be amazed at the input you can get back.
It's like you had your own little incubation hub kind of built in, right? And you're like, does this make sense? Would you want to do this? And then using that as a way to kind of think about it. Mm-hmm. So now I know that you guys have 20 plus locations, right? So you guys have been growing over these years. What were those early days of growth like? Because you had mentioned that you had chosen to go the franchising route, and I want to talk a little bit about that. Why did we choose that rather than, privately buying up and managing all these different locations?
Yeah. So when I first opened, I would get phone calls from people who had used us, but then maybe they were visiting, or else they had moved. And so they would call and say, gosh, I used Kids Park. I want one in my neighborhood now. How do I do it? And it was almost like they expected me to give them the whole outline in 10 minutes on a phone call. So once we saw so many people were calling, that's when I talked to my board of directors, and they were saying franchising might be approach. The reason we chose that was, one, I feel that in order to develop trust is so important in childcare. In order to develop it, I think you can more quickly establish it with a person who is living in your own community than to think of a big corporation that's back out in California. Mm-hmm. We also thought in order to do it well, we would have to build in a lot of checkpoints, which would mean a very deep organization with regional managers, district managers, and everything. And I didn't want that big of a corporate structure, especially at that time. And then the funding to do it would have been huge. So decided to go the franchise route. And I've been amazed. The biggest surprise to me was how much I enjoyed the mentoring of other business owners, the training of new owners. I didn't know that was going to be as enjoyable as it has been.
What were those early days like when the phone is ringing and someone says, hey, I was at Kids Park. I want a Kids Park to be in my neighborhood. Do you remember kind of those early moments of being like, well, this is what we should do? How was that experience like? Because that's organic growth, which so many entrepreneurs struggle for. But it seemed like it was kind of, people were banging down your door saying, how do we duplicate this amazing model?
Yeah, it was really interesting, and was very complimentary. And I think for the most part, it was great. Luckily, going back to, I'm a list maker, we had a lot of stuff documented. So that part was really good. So it was easier to get into the franchise model from that respect. I think the hardest part when doing that kind of thing, though, is you give out a lot of information before you can sell a franchise. And sometimes you end up giving out information and then they walk away and do it on their own, which is fine. And, that's business. Um,
Imitation is the biggest form of flattery, right?
I know. And I keep telling myself that. But, they make sometimes there are some changes made. And I always question, is that really for the betterment of the owner or is it for the betterment of the child and the family? And
Mm.
I really would like us to think more about the betterment of the family and the child than just the company, especially in childcare, because you are playing a big role.
I mean, there's a lot of conversations today, especially that I'm having here on the podcast about early childhood development and how important it is to have your child in a safe, trusted, cultivating environment that allows for them to continue to grow. So, why do you think, and I don't want to point fingers here, but why do you think so many business owners make decisions to, I would say, benefit the owner of the business instead of the customer that they're serving?
I think there's a lot of forces in play, especially in this type of economy where people
Mm.
have to pinch pennies and try to figure out how do you cope with inflation, how do you cope with all the regulation changes, and for us, a lot of the time it's having to cope with the change in how people spend their time. So for Kids Park, for instance, we were one of the primary reasons we were needed was for people to keep appointments, run errands, attend school. Well, they can attend night school or even day school. A lot of courses are offered online, so you're not leaving home. A lot of people aren't running their errands in town. They're buying stuff online. You don't need help with that. Um, they're not going out to dinner as often because of inflation. So all the occasions that for Kids Park we relied on customers, they're not coming as often. And so then you have to look at the whole utilization of your center to see how can you fill it or how can you better manage all the costs. The other thing that has made people really focus in on what's better for them is that a lot of childcare in many states is being taken over by the public schools. So where you originally had a business planned for a infant to 5-year-old market, now you're being asked to do the same amount of business, but you only have infants to 3-year-olds. So you're losing a large segment of the market. And I think because of those tensions, uh, they do sometimes have to put themselves first. Um, Although I still think most centers are doing a phenomenal job dealing with families and kids. But I think that's those are some of the reasons why the stresses have been made them to really look at themselves first.
Yeah. And I think that, that is one of the quickest ways to build a business. But is that the quickest way to create sustainability or the best way to create sustainability? I'm not
No,
really sure it is, right?
no. I think in order for it to be sustainable, I think these are things that you have to look at. Well, then it's going back to your original business model. What can you provide that still isn't being provided? What can you enlarge upon? A lot of it, though, is going to take educating the public so that they can see the benefits for using a service. And I think because we are a regulated industry, there has to be a more vocal and organized feedback to government about some of their plans and how they are enacting them.
That was an area of discussion that I know you wanted to dive into as I was looking at my notes for today's conversation. You talked about the regulations, the policies, if you will, in the childcare space need to adapt and need to be changed. What are some of the biggest things that we're fighting against in this space that's kind of stopping other people from creating their version of Kids Park? Or like, what are some of the societal factors that we're rubbing against?
Well, the regulations really haven't been updated since the 50s. They're,
Okay.
you
So
know,
area number
mom and
one.
dad, you know, two parents, two kids living in suburbia. Um, and it's just so different. We need regulations that take in consideration the whole family. Um, there's a lot of attention to being very specific on who you can hire, which I, which in all states, but some states are better than others. Um, I would hope that government or states would give the owners more credit or more flexibility to hire people that they can trust and that can bring value to the kids. Right now, they are very specific on some early childhood education, which obviously is needed. But how about bringing in art teachers, music teachers? How about bringing in even coding for little kids? None of this stuff, none of these people are going to have ECE. And so why can't we have them supervised without and being able to be counted in ratio, which is something that child care centers need, and making it easier to do it, so that we can really bring enrichment into the center. Um, I always laugh, you can have a high school education, know how to code, you can be hired to code, make $100,000 or more a year, but that same person can't watch 6 children for an hourly wage. Makes no sense, does it? And this person may have worked in summer camps. They may have volunteered with the different groups, community groups, and you just meet this person and they'd be phenomenal, but they can't work for the children. Doesn't matter if they're fingerprinted or whatever. They could work with children, but they would have such a low ratio that what you paid that person, you couldn't get back from a business standpoint. So that makes no sense.
It seems like we're stuck in the mindset of the 50s, right? I mean, there's a certain
Very
amount of
much.
people or a certain demographic or target avatar, if you will, of people who can look after our children. But that really doesn't lean into the idea of creativity, of curiosity, because the way in which children are influenced today is completely different. I mean, even from when I was born in 1990, now kids are given iPads as an example. They say, hey, just look at this iPad. And so I would love for them to have early exposure to people who can code and treat them how to do or teach them how to do certain things that would turn into skill sets that they could leverage later in life. Like, what an amazing exposure process for these kiddos. Now, with all the challenges that we talk about here, Debbie, why didn't you guys choose to say, Kids Park, you're going to sign a long contract. You're going to be locked into a certain amount of hours per month, whether you use them or not. You're paying for this time like many other organizations do. Why didn't you choose to go that path?
I put myself in as the customer, and I don't want to do it. I did not want to be locked in because I wanted flexibility, which I think most people want nowadays more than anything is flexibility. So because I didn't want it, I figured other people wouldn't want it, and I didn't want to have to manage it. So, and then the other side of it was when I was trying to figure it out, knowing that hourly care is going to need a large database of people, because I'm imagining not everyone's going to come the same day. Mm-hmm. If we started to lock them into contracts, it was the operational side of, well, then how many seats do you keep open for drop-ins? Because the worst possible thing with the drop-in is to turn anybody away. They're coming because they need you. So you don't want to have to say, sorry, we're full. We want to be available.
I mean, you're empathizing for your customer. I mean, this was your lived experience. This was something that you truly thought of. This is the pain point that you identified. I feel like you've been doing right by your end customer this entire journey, and that's why you guys have been able to grow and be successful. Now, there's one other thing that I want to talk about, which is the element of there are fewer and fewer people today, in which we kind of touched on, who are getting into the childcare and early development space. So why do you think we're seeing those macro problems for the amount of people that we can hire? And then how are you guys doing things differently to meet that demand and that need?
I think there are a couple of things that have played into that. First of all, I do think it's the regulations. So in California, for instance, they specifically say that if you're going to work in childcare, you need these 12 college units. As soon as you say that's what you needed, you've almost created a union pay scale. If everyone has the same credentials, well, then everyone should be paid the same. If someone comes in with greater training, of course, is going to bring more to it. Yes, they're going to get paid more, but it's almost like they have set a standard. If all you need is 12, that's all you're going to get. People who may not be choosing this career, even though they enjoy children, probably are doing it because of the pay scale, I would imagine. But if we could open up that pay, which we have, childcare workers in most areas, the pay has gone up 28 to 30% over just the last couple of years. And many times you can get, depending on the center, you may be able to bring your child to work with you, which we think is the best thing. I mean, if you have your child there, you know it's going to be a very high quality program. So I think it's the pay. I think it's availability of classes also. As soon as they say you must have these classes, there's people who are going to line up to take those classes, but they may not be able to accommodate all the people who want to. So if you are looking for a job, or if you're interested in going on for additional classes and you can't get the classes you want, pretty soon you're going to change your mind and try a different field. Many states have changed from saying you need these classes before you are hired to saying you must continue your education and take X number of units over the next few years. My hat's off to those states who recognize what needs to be done to keep the field, to keep teachers in the field.
One thing that I know is that you said very early on in the process of building Kids Park, you made a very conscious decision to ask a really important question. When do you want to work? Why did you ask that question, and what has the impact on that been?
That has been our model from the beginning. You're right. I think it has kept our staff engaged. We typically, and right now we have staff who've been with us for over 30 years. Our average teachers, I think, have been with us now eight or 9 years. And that's because I wanted to recognize the whole person when we hired them. I had an occasion when I was in a grocery once. I was in the checkout lane, and the checkers are calling back and forth saying, "Can you take my Tuesday? I'll swap my Saturday." They were remaking the schedule that had been handed to them, because it was almost like the management hadn't taken into consideration that people have a life outside of work. And I thought, well, that's crazy. When I put a schedule together, it's because I know these staff work well. I know we'll have a great mix of talent in this shift. Whereas if they start scheduling themselves, who knows what we're going to end up with. So from the very start, we always asked, we did this 3 times a year to coordinate with the school schedules. When do you want to work? When are you available? And if you tell me how many hours you want a week, that's what we're going to give you. And then no excuse for not coming. And of course, there's, sickness and all, but, for the most part, people show up. The mom might want to work days while her kid's in school, but come summer, maybe she wants to work evenings instead and be home for the kids. Maybe the college student is done with classes during the day, so she wants to work nights, or maybe she goes to night school and she wants to work days. Who knows? But we always try to take in consideration the whole person. And then we do encourage them to bring children to work with them.
I want to talk a little bit about the mindset of being an entrepreneur and being a founder. So one thing that I realize is you guys have been in business for quite some time now. This journey has had, I'm sure, its mountaintops and its deep valleys.
Mm-hmm.
How have you kept your mindset in the place of gratitude and appreciation for what you've created over all these years?
You're right. It's been a roller coaster sometimes. And, with anything that you stick with or anything, life, there's ups and downs. For me, the best way for me to get recharged is to go to the center and work the front desk, because I know that within 3 or 4 check-ins or check-outs, I'm going to have a mom or dad say, I don't know what I would have done without you today. I just don't know. I've had, whatever the reason might be, family occasion, work occasion, whatever, I was lost. I really needed you, and that helps. And I think that was probably true for all our staff. Everyone likes to feel like they're providing a service. And we even use those words all the time. Welcome to Kids Park or whatever, we may say, but we always add to it. We hope we can be of service.
Man, when I think about just the trust that you've been able to build with the brand of Kids Park, families know that they can come to you at a moment's notice and take advantage of something like a opened up doctor's appointment or an appointment that they have to be at. That's in itself, that flexibility, I feel like is so beautiful. One of the things that I often talk about is in the world of entrepreneurship, the only objective is not to make money, right? But it's to continue to keep playing the game. What would a piece of advice be that you have to somebody else who is trying to be in your space, who's just in the early stages of you back in the day when you realized that there was an opportunity for you to create a solution to a problem that you were living in? What would you tell them?
I always think it kind of goes back to what you said too. Put yourself in the customer's shoes first, then see how it works on the business side. To create a business and then force a customer doesn't work. You can't change that. I truly believe you have to look at what's missing in the marketplace and set their rules based on how they want to be treated. Going back to, I don't want to impose a contract on you. I want it to be flexible, but that's me. So, I think for whatever business and whatever person, they have to look at what it is they want as a customer.
I have, as we kind of land the plane here on our episode, I just want to say thank you for everything that you've done over all these years to support the community of our family. And when I say the community of our family, it is not just us individually with mom, dad, kiddos, or even grandparents, but it takes a community or a village to truly raise a little one. And you've been a perfect exemplification of exactly why that is. And the services that you guys deliver and offer to the community are so, so very important. So for everybody who's watching and listening, Debbie, seriously, Kids Park, have to go check them out. One of my final things that I want to say here is that our previous guest wanted to ask you a question.
Okay.
Now, as an entrepreneur and as a leader, this is a really important one. Who encourages you as a leader when you feel a little down, or maybe you just don't have that extra zip in your step? Because often we spend so much time encouraging and uplifting the people who we employ and everybody else around us, but often we don't get it. So who encourages you when you really need it?
That is a very good question. I'd have to say I'm very fortunate. I have a very, very close, very good relationship with my daughter, who is actually is in business herself, and she's a great sounding board. And she's able, I get so close to it. It's very beneficial for me to talk to her because she can see the bigger picture sometimes. So I would definitely say that she is a huge, huge support.
Well, I want you to know that you can always count on me as well. Part
Excellent.
of why
I got
I
your
do.
number.
You do. Part of why we do this, though, is, everybody who comes on the Hart and Hustle podcast is that exemplification of the intersection of heart and hustle. And the one thing that I recognize is that doing what we do as leaders and encouraging others and pouring into other people all day is not an easy task. And I think that we need to talk a little bit more about how we get encouragement at the end of the day, because the stresses, the challenges, the navigating the big problems, it weighs heavy. And when we don't have a community of people who are willing to say, Debbie, we are so proud of you for everything that you've accomplished over all these years in business, all of the lives that you've impacted, all the families who you've helped, and the people who have literally called you since day one and said, how do I get a kids park in my neighborhood? Those are people who have such gratitude for you being able to lean into those feelings of fear, maybe the feelings of uncertainty when this first started, and you said, I'm going to create my own thing. And I know that everybody who's watching and listening today is incredibly proud of you for everything that you've accomplished. So I just want to say, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Guys, that's been another episode of the Hart and Hustle podcast. That's the pod. There we go. Take you in the next one.